Tonight, on History, So It Doesn't Repeat, we explore personal productivity and how to clear our mental RAM with author David Allen. We'll discover how to get things done and learn how to make informed choices with ease. By learning a few keystone habits, you'll be primed to be productive and create a stress-free environment. Learning's the answer. What's the question? It's all coming up next on History, So It Doesn't Repeat.
Good evening and welcome back to History, So It Doesn't Repeat. I'm your host and navigator, Richard Grove, and tonight I'd like to begin with a quote. John Lennon once said, "There are no problems, only solutions." Since the time he said that, nothing much has changed. It was a conclusion without the step-by-step description of how to solve our problems. A few years later, a fellow named David Allen took it a step further by stating, "There are no problems, only unclarified projects." That epiphany has the power to deliver the solutions one mind at a time. You see, history is comprised of individuals who got things done. And I'm interested in seeing what your role might be in history after we all learn how to get things done together in this episode. Tonight's guest is the world leader in teaching stress-free productivity via skills through which you can consistently empty your head so that you can use it effectively to process your perceptions and discover the truth of the present. We cannot be in fear and thinking at the same time. So tonight's episode is going to teach you how to plant a garden in your mind to develop some strong cognitive roots necessary to practice the martial art of intellectual self-defense. Here to help us get started with the care and feeding of our new roots of understanding is David Allen, author of the book Getting Things Done, which teaches a method for life management. The end result we're seeking is cognitive liberty, for our minds to be free, clear of noise, focused and concentrated on being serenely present and living our lives in such a way that can bear useful fruits. David, thank you so much for making time in your busy schedule to be here today. What inspired you to embark on such a journey, a noble journey, to spread this wisdom throughout the world?
Well, it took me 25 years to figure out what I'd figured out. And I figured it out for myself to begin with. You know, you teach what you need to learn the most. So I was an out of control, unfocused kind of guy. And as I started to get involved in the professional world, I saw how easy it was to get distracted. I'd learned early on the strategic value of clear space through other endeavors that I was in, and really realized that there was a lot of stuff that got in the way of that. So I developed these methodologies. They really were just making explicit what we sort of all do implicitly that really work. And I just started to understand how those things work so that I could apply them much more consistently. And did that for myself. And then turned out that, you know, as I started to do coaching and consulting and doing work with people who ran businesses and entrepreneurs and folks like that, I discovered that these techniques, without fail, improved everyone's ability to be control and focused appropriately. So that's how it got developed. And as I say, deciding to write the book and deciding to spread it much further took me a long time to really realize how unique this was and that the world really did need it.
Are you appropriately engaged in this activity? And if so, how does something like that happen? What does it mean to be appropriately engaged in any given activity in life?
Well, it really means that you're present with whatever you're doing. And being present with what you're doing means you also need to be appropriately engaged with everything you're not doing. Otherwise, it'll hold your attention hostage and hijack your attention and distract you. So, you know, you and I right now have, I don't know how many hundreds of things, if not thousands of things we're not doing while we're talking to each other. So the degree to which we'll be able to be present with each other, for me to be able to be present with this conversation and not have my mind go somewhere else that might be unproductive and inappropriate, I need to be appropriately engaged with everything else. So having a systemic process so that I can constantly be aware of everything that I'm not doing and what the whole gestalt of my life really incorporates, and have a good map room. I can walk around and say, okay, can I afford to go hang out on the deck right now because we're on cruise control and there are no rocks we're going to hit and there are no boats going to run into us, and I can truly relax. That's appropriate engagement. Just doing that with all of your life is a game.
All right, David, so I've read your book, I've listened to your audio lecture many times. I've engaged in many of the activities that it describes. I've got my label maker, I've got my pocket capture method. I find this to be very, very useful. I had done this informally, implicitly, and not brought them all together as a system until I was engaged with your work. And so my question to you is, can you expound upon the benefits of being able to capture, clarify, and organize in context of knowledge work athletics? I mean, in my opinion, or in my observations, people have failed to exercise their minds in a structured way that brings about benefits. And what you've stumbled upon through those 25 years of development, call it development, is really, it's gold. And all the dirt cast aside from all those years, you've summarized it in such a way that it's succinct and easily expressed to people. So could you expound upon the ability to capture, clarify, and organize, and the power it can have to an individual?
Well, I think the easy way to say that is that your head is for having ideas, not for holding them. And I don't know how long I'm going to be preaching this, but most people, even very successful people and people who have to some degree applied these principles, they're still using their psyche as their system. And your psyche sucks as a system. It's a terrible office. It'll tend to remind you of things based upon how recent they were or how much emotional content you have tied to them. And that's not exactly the most strategic or fun way to make choices about where you put your focus and attention and how you point yourself. So basically, this is a model that allows you to offload remembering and reminding off your psyche, because that's something it does not do very well. And so offloading it also means that it will come back up if you don't have a trusted place and a trusted way to engage with what you've offloaded. So offloaded does not mean go unconscious, go numb, or forget. Offload means I have now appropriately stuck these over here, put them in the right place, trust that I or the right people will look at this at the right time and be reminded of what they need to be reminded of. In other words, that I've got the maps that I need to see. If I'm going to go sail a big sailing trip, I better make sure I've got the maps for the harbor, so I can see the little rocks there, and I've got the big map that's showing where I'm going, and I need all those different kind of maps. And I'm not going to do that in my head. Come on. And most people have a life much more complex than sailing a boat. And so being able to have essentially all this stuff externalized with the appropriate maps then allows your brain and your psyche and your intelligence to be freed up to be making good, conscious, intuitive choices. Basically, it allows you to be present with whatever you're doing.
Well, I think that ties into the fact that if you don't have this structure and method, and more importantly, the method in place as a habit so that you can consistently apply it and really achieve some results. If you don't have that kind of installed in your own mind of your own volition, then you're left subject to something that people call information overload, which is it's really a catchphrase for when people want to procrastinate. What is your opinion on information overload, and is our mind actually formed for all this information and we just lack the ability to organize it?
Well, it's not information overload, it's potential meaning overload. I mean, information overload, if that was true, you'd walk into a library and blow up. Actually, it'd blow up as soon as you wandered in nature, because nature is more information rich than almost any other place on the planet. That's why nature is so relaxing. Actually, if you wanted to go crazy, take away all your information. It's called sensory deprivation. It's an easy way to go nuts. So you actually love lots of information, lots of different horizons, lots of different angles that we're looking at life and getting input in a lot of ways. The issue is that, snakes and berries and bears and thunderstorms are pretty evident in terms of the meaningful things you might notice when you're walking out in nature. The problem is that the hundreds of email that are piling up for you and me today, Richard, the snakes and berries and thunderstorms are embedded inside it. They're not self-evident, which means you've actually got to open those things, decide what it is, and they could all be a snake or a berry or a thunderstorm. And oh my gosh, that could be potentially meaningful stuff in there that might change what I'm doing, what I'm thinking. It might change, might impact my life. Oh my gosh. And so it's not information per se, but it's potential meaning that we have yet to clarify what exactly means, but it might be. Oh my gosh. So it's, in a way, it's the stress of opportunity or the stress of possibility that is really the overload that most people are dealing with.
Well, I think it even goes a step further. I think it's a stimulus response reaction. It's a physical reaction almost in fear, because without these methods and tools at our beck and call, we are left to be confused and frustrated and panicked and frozen in those situations. We don't want to look and actually explore it. And that looking, that asking the question is the process of learning, which will help you transform that unknown, that uncertainty into knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. So I really think that you're on to the key method. Is we have to start using our own personal distributed cognition, for lack of better terms, write it down, and leverage our mind's ability to say, hey, this is a useful idea. I may or may not be in the right place at the right time, but I can distribute that and revisit it later through something called my INBASKET that we can talk about in a couple minutes. But this idea of distributed cognition, what is the power that one as an individual enjoys when we are able to start leveraging our ability to give a brain to our brain?
Well, the music's not in the radio. So, as your mind is able to free itself up, there are lots of good ideas to be had. There are lots of creative things to express. There are lots of things that we don't consciously see right now. We just need room. We need room for it, and we need to create the flow of possibility. And so it's pretty easy to constipate your psyche when you have potentially meaningful things. You haven't clarified what they mean. You haven't clarified where they need to go. You haven't clarified how do I now engage with that anymore. And then that just sort of junks up the psyche, and then it sort of bangs around like a pinball machine. And it just doesn't work that well. See, the stuff, Richard, that I uncovered it's really mechanical. It's not like something you have to believe or something. It's just the way it works. It's subtle, but it is just a mechanical process. You do this, it produces this kind of result. So being able to distribute, get the stuff out of your head. And I think we're just beginning to taste how powerful that is. I mean, to me, GTD, getting things done 3.0 is, okay, what do you do once you have a clear head? How do you then leverage the opportunity to make really cool decisions, add even more value by creating contexts that allow your mind and your psyche to actually trigger, much more creative and powerful and positive things you might want to be experiencing and expressing. So that's a whole wide universe still available. But most people got some heavy lifting to do just to build in these habits to keep the psyche from overloading itself with all of this.
Well, and building this idea of habits out, between stimulus and response, we have to have a habit of creating space, because that's where we get our choice and our freedoms and our opportunity. The ability to be spontaneous is by breaking the stimulus response cycle. And so what I saw as a key physical role in your process, that once it moved into my office, I said, wow, I'm able to break the stimulus response of, let's say, being interrupted, because I have this thing called an inbox or an INBASKET, and it's a physical place to corral my stuff so that I can actually one by one pick it up and identify it. And it's that process of identifying your stuff that brings the mental serenity, because it's no longer stuff, because it's in process, and we can go into the process later. But let's talk about this brilliant observation. It had been around for years, but until somebody explains, here's the form and function and purpose of an INBASKET, I think it's lost on a lot of people.
Yeah, I look around, a lot of people don't even have an INBASKET. I tell people, look, you need some capture place, both at home and at work, if those are different places, as well as in transit. And people go, oh, an INBASKET at home? I say, I don't want an INBASKET at home. Well, look, if you don't have an INBASKET at home, your home is your INBASKET. So this is not a question of whether you have one, it's a question of size. So most people's INBASKET at home is the first flat surface inside their door. When they come in, they just pile the stuff up. And, that doesn't work very well at all. And so the idea of having some place, as you said, that gives me the freedom to collect and capture potentially relevant stuff, knowing that I will get to that and make a good executive decision about it. But to even just corral that is a huge benefit for most people. But most people don't work the INBASKET and don't realize how powerful it is. We were almost going to title my first book, instead of Getting Things Done, we were going to call it Zen and the Art of INBASKET Maintenance. But, that was a little hackneyed, by that point. But the whole idea of how freeing it is to be able to have a trusted place to dump stuff without having to make a decision about it. Because capturing is a very different event than organizing or reviewing or making choices about your options. Very different things. That's why I understood this process of how you get, a situation under control as a 5-stage process. It's not just a simple, okay, get organized or set your priorities. That's way too oversimplistic.
Well, I noticed that working in the corporate world 10 years ago, everybody had a calendar. Everyone had a place to corral their where to be when type of events, but not many people had an inbox. And I think what you've discovered is the physical equivalent of the calendar. You need a place to corral the other things that go along with those schedules and appointments and to-dos and projects and all the other things that clutter up our desk. And I find that our desks are a reflection of our mind. And when they're cluttered and covered with stuff, we have anxiety and confusion and fear and frustration and all the things we're trying to avoid. And that once you're able to pick up an item, interrogate it, as I say, ask the questions and figure out what you need to do, and then you just go along with the flow chart, which again, we can get to in a couple minutes. But this powerful idea that you've struck onto, the combination of, hey, you use a calendar, now add the inbox and see how these things start to work, because you're able to capture and collect and actually start to make things useful when you identify them. So the symptom is starting to be resolved that I see in society, because what you're able to do, what you're teaching through the method is integrity. You can't do what you said you were going to do when you said you were going to do it if you can't capture, collect, organize, review, keep your calendar in integrity, and know what you can manage and what you can't.
Sure, absolutely. And, you know, people often say, well, gee, David, you don't talk a lot about priorities. Boy, I'm thinking priorities all the time. You know, moment to moment to moment. What's next? What's next? What's the most important thing? Or what's the most interesting? Or where should I point myself right now? So I'm the hardest working guy in show business about setting priorities. The issue is how many priorities do you have during a day? Well, how many different things do you think about during a day? Because you have the choice about what to think about at any point in time. So if somebody was right and they said you have 50,000 thoughts, people complaining about 300 emails a day. How about you listen to your own head? You really want to get overwhelmed, stop the world and listen inside. And most people, it is a huge racket in there, and they use the noise of the world to distract them from the inner noise they have. But they haven't got their own committee lined up. Say, wait a minute, that's what that is, that's what that is, that's what that means to me, that's what that means to me. Let me look at all of it and go, no, I'm going to have a beer or take a nap or play with my dog, because that's my priority right now. Then that's the appropriate engagement. But you can't be appropriately engaged with stuff that some part of you says, look, there might be some commitment or decision or thinking I need to do about you, and I'm avoiding that. So, you know, you can relax if you let yourself get into crisis, because crisis produces a kind of a serenity and relaxation because it forces appropriate engagement. You're forced, you know, the building's burning. You are forced to focus on an outcome called live, don't burn up. Right? You're forced to make an action decision. Where's the exit? Where do I go right now? And you're also renegotiated every other agreement. The fact that you need tires on your car or need to submit your taxes just get put on a back burner when the building is burning, right? And so you actually then can very easily wind up in your zone when you're in those situations. I just discovered a way to get in your zone and stay in your zone without having a crisis forces you to do that, because it is about being appropriately engaged. What's the outcome I'm committed to? What's the action step required to move it forward? How do I park those appropriately in terms of the gestalt of, you know, the whole map of my life? And then just, you know, shoot down the middle.
Well, I do. When you use this map metaphor, I always get a smile, because I see all these tools that I'm collecting as tools of navigation, tools to help you get safely from one place to another, whether it's through communication or getting things done or learning how to learn what you need to learn to get through your days to get to these places. So this idea of a gyroscope, I see GTD as a gyroscope that helps you maintain your mental balance as you go through learning these different things, because the unknown brings with it fear and uncertainty and these other issues that if you have a method of learning if you know how to learn anything, and then those situations, it's the same widget every time you're cranking. It's the same thing you pointed out with getting things done. So if you have a project, if you have a problem, you're going to need a solution. And you said that there's no solutions, there's only good project planning. So you're able to go through these steps and resolve it. And now it's no longer 101 different challenges every day. It's 101 different widgets you have to crank for each of these different situations. And when I mean that GTD is like a gyroscope, it avoids the mental overflow from one project to another. And this is brilliant, because some of the issues that I see in working with colleagues and working with other people in the public is that we are all surrounded by people who, if they don't have these methods, they're struggling. And I just see it as like a humane philanthropic gift to be able to bridge the gap and show people it's like, this is not just for corporations. You can use this as an individual to help bring some intellectual self-defense into your life. And this is where it gets into the martial arts. Can you tell me about the martial arts aspects of getting things done, specifically reacting to the unknown?
Well, as you know, I had a background in the martial arts before I got involved in all of this work, and it provided some great examples and analogies for this whole process. As I say, the strategic value of clear space was something that's a real experience. If you get into the high levels of training in the martial arts, there are usually quite a number of meditative or contemplative kinds of exercises and reflective exercises. And there may be a spiritual aspect to it, but there's certainly a practical aspect. When 4 people jump in a dark alley, you do not want to have 3,000 unprocessed emails hanging in your psyche anywhere. You need to be absolutely clear and clear and clear and clear. So being able to be clear, and how do I clear my head? So the idea of mind like water, which I basically lifted from the martial arts, is really an idea of how do I not over or underreact to anything? How do I get beginner's mind, as the Zen masters would say? How do I show up in this sense of this innocence and this clear space so that I can be fully present to take in what's showing up, as opposed to taking one meeting to the next, taking home to work, taking work to home, and having, again, a lot of things in our commitments that are holding our psyche hostage. And how do you quiet all of that so that you can be fully available and be present? And the idea is, if you're surprised, you will tend to over or underreact. If you're a crazy maker with a lot of high level ideas, but you're not grounded in terms of action and execution, then you're not going to be as prepared as you need to be. Or if you happen to be one of those very operational oriented people that don't have a vision and don't have a focus other than the micromanagement side, you will not be prepared. You'll overreact as well. So the whole idea is getting to that space, which is where you have the ability, like what I call the captain and commander zone, which is you've got your eye on the horizon, but you've got your hand on the helm. So you have the ability to be able to have that wonderful paradoxical dynamic of grounded operational reality and vision and focus and perspective. And that's the ideal state to operate from. People will tend to move toward one side or the other of that polarity. They'll either tend to be blue sky visionary people that have stuff all over the place and can't hold their attention on anything very long, or sort of the micromanagement. I'm down at the functional execution level, and they may be over-structured. Their structures become strictures, because it's too much structure. It doesn't allow you flexibility or spontaneity or the ability to respond. So your ability to respond to a sudden storm or to your ship suddenly hitting something or whatever has a lot to do with what's my ability to maintain the gestalt and the large picture, and what's my ability to maintain control down at the most mundane operational execution level, the next action. So outcome and action become really the zeros and ones of the martial arts, the zeros and ones of workflow, the zeros and ones of life.
Okay, so building upon this idea of clearing space, because I see the mind as your own personal private real estate, and we have to use intellectual self-defense to defend that property, that space. And so once we're able to clear space so that we can think between stimulus and response and actually start to do something useful and incorporate changes in our life, mind like water, to be able to use a method to, no matter what happens, you can incorporate it, you can process it, and you can, if you don't have time to think about it right now, you can save it for later because your mind has a trusted place to capture and collect this information through creating new habits. So I want to talk about the importance of getting to zero, the ability to as my favorite first century philosopher Seneca would have said, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. The ability to be prepared is one thing, but when you meet opportunity, you have to be able to be in integrity with your schedule. You have to have a clear inbox. These are things that I've found to be very useful because it says, until this interview, I have nothing else to do. If something pops up, I can spontaneously take advantage of that now, as opposed to later, because I was too overwhelmed because I had poor planning. And so I've noticed numerous benefits in my own life, but I wanted you to speak, I guess, generally about clearing mental RAM, using this space for thinking only about things once if it's meaningful, and then using the method to be able to clear more space and get more things done because you can have more productive thoughts.
Yeah, well, one way to think about this methodology is it produces the condition for you to flourish. And, I love that word flourish. I think it's such a great word. And most of the people who've implemented some version of this methodology would say the common denominator of people's positive testimonials is I was able to be present, and it gave me the freedom to fill in the blank, freedom to write rock music, the freedom to use my imagination much more creatively, the freedom to watch my girls play soccer without being on my smartphone, the freedom to be able to be in the kitchen when I want to play there. So a lot of it is about creating that kind of space to be able to be free to do wherever you want to put your attention and wherever you want to put your energy. So that's the essence, essentially, of what you're after here, of getting that kind of room inside your psyche, and stop using your psyche to try to do things that it just, as I mentioned before, doesn't do very well. So your mind doesn't have one. If it did, it would only remind you of things when you could actually do something about them, when that'd be useful to be reminded. But your mind is like this wild monkey. It's just running loose inside of there. It'll wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning and beat you bloody about something you can't do anything about while you're lying in bed, which is not very smart. And, to your point too, Richard, you mentioned earlier, most people actually do versions of this already. So when people say, well, gee, David, you're getting too organized, or you have too many lists, or you have too many categories. And I say, well, if you don't think lists work very well, do you use a calendar? Sure. Well, then don't be intellectually dishonest. Throw it away. If you think your mind can manage that, but the complexity, as you mentioned before, of our life outweigh beyond how many things are on your calendar. So just the fact that, gee, I now can use these tools to be able to offload that job of the psyche, to be able to free it up, to then be able to take advantage of my intuitive intelligence, be able to take advantage of being more creative, more innovative, more loving, more peaceful, more whatever the heck it is that you want, that you would consider the golden goodies of your life. A lot of people know how to do that. In a lot of the corporations that I'm in, there's all kinds of leadership programs, and those are all fine and good, but most people I know that are in those programs go, I know how to do that. I know how to mentor. I just don't have time. I don't have the space. I don't have any bandwidth to do that. So one of the best things you can do in terms of your ability to be a leader is to make sure you've got clear space. And also, that's also going to engender trust. So, if you're going to lead me, I want to trust that if I toss something to you that I think is potentially relevant information, that you're not going to lose it or fall through the crack.
Absolutely, because it puts your mind at rest, at ease, and this comes back to the value of clear space. Because I find for instance, my email inbox. Most people do still get email, and a lot of people I know have many thousands of emails in the inbox, and they haven't discovered creating folders and being organized. But the serenity you get from having your email at zero, knowing that things are either in process or scheduled or whatever it needs to be to put your mind at rest, is invaluable. And what I see is a lot of people are addicted to the random schedules of positive reinforcement that email and other things on the internet bring, and that robs them of their time. And due to the content of this show, I give out a lot of homework where people need to reprioritize their time and their habits to consume this new information and learn their way through it. And this is the same sort of habit that we're trying to break with email. If we can learn how to get control over our time as individuals, then we can make time to learn things like these useful methods that we kind of share with the audience.
Yes, as you mentioned before, that one of the ways to get addicted to anything is random positive reinforcement, which is what email and social pinging and all that stuff is doing for people. And most people are living in I don't want to miss anything mode. I don't want to miss anything, and this might be important, this might be critical, this might be something I need to see, and this might be, and so they're constantly checking about all that stuff, and that's a huge distraction. If you zeroed out your backlog every 24 hours, maybe 48 max, then a part of you doesn't have to keep doing that. Look, I'll get to it. It's in my system. I will get to it when I'm in getting to it modality. And in getting to it modality, then I can then sit down and I'm ready to now process my INBASKET to zero. So when I'm not doing anything else, I'm cleaning up because there's a surprise coming toward me I can't see. And when that thing hits, man, the last thing I want is any kind of a backlog, hanging onto my psyche. So if I'm not sure exactly what I should be doing, clean a drawer, clean up your INBASKET, clean up any kind of backlog of unprocessed stuff so that you're as close as you can be to be fully present. Then you can evaluate the new thing, the surprise, the unplanned stuff against a really total gestalt. If I've got 300 unprocessed emails and I get surprised, that's called an interruption. And you get angry at the world for disturbing your well-organized life. If I've got 0 emails and I get a surprise, I go, oh, hey, a new opportunity to influence my world. Let me see if that's more important than any of the other things that I should be doing right now. So it makes me, I got a full team then in my head that can then make decisions about, okay, where do we organize our committee right now? Where do we put our focus right now? And if you got a big backlog or a lot of unprocessed stuff, that's almost impossible to be able to do. You'll be driven by latest and loudest.
Well, I've heard you speak in the past about the term open loops. And if you have all these open loops, these open tasks that you haven't done anything with, and you don't have a method to do anything with them, that creates a polarity of all this unprocessed stuff in your head. That creates cognitive dissonance. It creates learned helplessness. There's all these situations that I see plaguing our culture in America. So it's, how do we learn our way out of these things? And one of these, the methods is, how do you manage your time? How do you process the unknown and actually make it something productive? So now that we recognize that we need a tool for managing our life, or time management, or productivity, or whatever nomenclature people would like to hang on it, let's jump into the fray of the battle and actually say that we're surrounded by an office full of stuff, and we're overwhelmed, and we can't be productive, and I can't even take a phone call right now, and my voicemail is full. Take the audience just through a sample steps. Don't give away any of your golden secrets, because that's what you want people to consult and keep you writing books. But the idea is, it's a general process that I think is very simple and basic, and you had to be a rocket scientist to discover this, and surprisingly no one else had described it this way, so kudos.
Well, come on, I'll give you the secrets. It's pretty simple. Get anything that's potentially meaningful out of your head and around your environment collected into one place. Sooner than later, decide what exactly those things mean to you in terms of outcomes and actions. Organize the results in appropriate categories so that you can step back and reflect and review your multiple horizons of commitments at any point in time, and then trust your heart or your intuitive judgment call about what you do at any point in time. That's the whole game. So what it looks like, that may sound like motherhood or apple pie, or easy to do or hard to do. What it would really look like, to answer your question, would be if I walked in to work with anybody, and what I do is look around and go, hey, what are all the things that you have attention on right now? What's not on cruise control? What's not on cruise control is stuff lying around your office that doesn't belong there permanently. Things on your desk, things in your desk, things under your desk, things in the corner of the office, anything there. And we don't tell people what's incomplete or what their open loops are. We just ask, hey, you got any attention on this? Oh yeah, I need to. Okay, well, we just gather all that stuff and throw it all in the INBASKET. And then once we get all the physical triggers, because the physical triggers is a pretty obvious one right away. Pull out your wallet. Anything that doesn't belong in there permanently, throw it in the INBASKET. Anything in your briefcase right now. And I've gone home with CEOs before because they had so much attention on their personal life that it's sort of fallen out of control, that we had to gather it all there too. It doesn't matter whether it's personal, professional, anything that's got your attention. We need to get that inventory captured. And so that looks like just gathering physically, just throw it all in an INBASKET. And then empty your head. Once you get all the physical stuff, anything else in your mind that may not be represented in that stack, oh yeah, I need to get in touch with. Oh, that's right, I got it. Oh, I ought to. And once you grab all that. Now that takes 1 to 6 hours for most professionals to actually just gather all the stuff that they actually have attention on and where they put their attention that's not complete yet, that they can't let go of, or that's not on cruise control. So that's quite a process just in and of itself. So that'll take, half a day or however long it takes. I've taken as little as 30 minutes and as long as 3 days, truly, to just collect all that stuff. So then you can't just leave it there. That's why this is a holistic process. You can't just do that. If you do that, now you just got a bunch of piles. Now you got a bunch of lists, and then you have compulsive list makers. They've got lists everywhere. They've got Post-its on their screen. They've got stuff all over the place. That won't help either, because if you don't then move to the next couple of phases of processing and organizing, then the stuff will creep back up into your psyche, because you won't have a trusted place. It says, yeah, but you're not looking at the list, or it's under a pile there, or whatever. So once we get the piles, then we need to reduce the piles to 0. And that doesn't mean finish all those things. It does mean decide what they are. And that's where we go through, then we have one at a time. What is that thing? Here's something in my INBASKET right now. My wife put in there, oh, what is this? So I have to pick it up and say, okay, what is it? What's the action required? And then, once I make that decision, and by the way, those people looking at this right now, if you go through that process, if you get nothing more than the 2-minute rule, if you haven't built that habit into your life already, that's worth the price of admission, worth listening to Richard and me for an hour, just to get the 2-minute rule. The 2-minute rule simply says, look, if the action item on this thing takes less than 2 minutes, do it right then, if I'm ever going to do it at all, because it'll take you longer to stack it, track it, and look at it again than to finish it when it's in your face to begin with. And so that's where you're really starting to build in Teflon, called don't let this stuff lie around. Make a decision. What is it? What am I going to do with it? And what's the action step required for it? And that's the process. And that process is a pretty simple one. Though most people avoid those decisions until the heat on that, whatever this thing is, forces me to have to decide on it. But deciding right on the front end then makes that available to me as an action to do in my inventory of all the actions that are going to move forward to close these loops and to move the needle about my life. So I need to make that decision. So first is capture. Then I need to go through each one and decide, is it actionable, yes or no? If it's not, I toss it, pickle it for later review, or file it as reference. And if it is actionable, then I say, what's the very next action on it? And is there some project I need to capture about this? If the one action is not going to finish whatever it is. So I then need to determine, to be appropriately engaged with this, if it is a project, I need to have a project list somewhere where I keep track of this project. What's the next action? And I need to track both of those until this thing gets completed. So that's where you generate what needs to populate your organization system. Outcomes I need to keep track of and be reminded of consistently. Action items I need to be reminded of so that I have the opportunity to be able to execute on these things easily when I'm in the context to do that. As well as what are the things I'm waiting for, what are the things I can delegate to other people. So there's a lot of just good executive decision making that goes on when you actually empty your INBASKET. That's actually a lot of what your work is defining what your work is in the INBASKET. So the third thing is you need to then organize that. So you can't leave that just with these decisions made without keeping track of it. If I decide this is a phone call I need to make to my bank, and I can't make the phone call right now, I then need to track, okay, here's a phone call I need to make, and I need to track that reminder. And that's why the organization phase comes in as phase 3. It's not the first thing to do, because organization, if I'm trying to organize this but haven't decided this is a phone call I need to make, I'll avoid looking at this because I know there's a decision about it I haven't made yet. Most people's organization are simply incomplete lists of still unclear things, and that then they start avoiding looking at because they know there's thinking and decision making they haven't done yet. They don't want to be reminded of that.
Well, I think a lot of people do this all implicitly, and I think a lot of people have really great ideas, and I noticed that without a capture method, without a notepad beside their bed, for those thoughts that wake you up and say, I have a good idea, if you don't make a habit out of starting to capture and get that output going, you're kind of still lost afterwards. But I noticed after a couple years of doing that, I found it very productive. I was getting great ideas. And then I started thinking, I don't want to roll over and write that down. I'll just remember it. And when I'm having coffee at my desk tomorrow morning, I will remember that message. And that's worked very effectively. And then what I learned was that as a function of doing those habits, it's no longer necessary to wake up in the middle of the night because I'm getting all the relevant thoughts and planning and organizing out during the day, and I sleep like a log. And so I know you can't advertise, read this book and sleep like a log because people get the wrong idea, but it's an effective tool. It contains effective tactics, and I think a lot of those tactics are around the building of habits. So I just wanted to add this quote to this very interesting discussion. This is from William James, and it's a quote about habit. It says, "Habit is thus the enormous flywheel of society, its most precious conservative agent. It alone is what keeps us all within the bounds of ordinance and saves the children of fortune from the envious uprisings of the poor." So would you be so kind as to describe the power of habit? I know it's not your book, but I know that it blends right in symbiotically, and I think a lot of people who have studied the nature of habit would find it useful in grasping on to getting things done.
Well, I think it was Alfred North Whitehead who had a fabulous quote that thinking should be reserved for special moments, like the cavalry charge, where you save it for special moments. So whatever you can build in so you don't have to constantly keep thinking, and you can build in these habits that allow your mind to be able to relax, knowing that it's going to do these behaviors then it saves your mental energy, your thinking energy for real decisions you need to make and the real energy you need. So I know you mentioned The Power of Habit. Charles Duhigg's a big champion of my stuff, and it's a fabulous book, by the way. And that book was worth its weight in gold just for the idea of a keystone habit. What is a habit that if I shift this little habit, it's gonna knock dominoes down of a lot of other things. Maybe it's putting on your exercise gear when you first wake up in the morning, like it was for him. In this case, the habit of emptying your in basket, getting that to zero. Once you get that as a habit, there's still a bunch of stuff I resist like the plague. I teach this stuff, but come on, I resist making action decisions. I resist doing all kinds of things. But because I have the habit of getting my in basket to zero, that forces me to do a lot of other stuff. If I said, okay, David, I'd like you to go tackle 43 decisions about stuff you need to do today. No. Hey, David, go empty your in basket. Those 43 things are in that in basket. And so by the time I get to the bottom, I will have actually done those things that I would have thought were much harder to begin with. So building in habits like keeping stuff out of your head, emptying your in basket, making next action decisions about things when they're on your mind. Those things are real keystone habits because they then start to impact a lot of other things that then you don't have to work on so much because it will automatically be handled.
It sounds so simple, right?
It is. Easy? Yeah, well, as easy as it is to change habits. See, Richard, I think the problem most people have is control is probably the biggest addiction to the human psyche. The need for control. The fear of being out of control is probably the greatest human fear. And so I think people keeping all kinds of stuff in their head as a way to try to get control, but it's a very ineffective way to do that. So everybody thinks, if I keep it all in here, I don't want to write it all down because then it'll be really out of control and it's feeling so vulnerable to begin with. And what they don't realize is that keeping it all in your head is what's throwing it out of control. So it is kind of a paradoxical thing that you have to step through. That's why I said this is much like the martial arts or learning the banjo or learning the tango or anything else. The initial moves feel very awkward and very unnatural and very unnecessary. Until you do them 1,000 times, then you say there is no better, more efficient and effective way to move. So a lot of this called keep everything out of your head feels unnatural and unnecessary and awkward until you start to really catch how powerful that really is. So people have to step through those kinds of, I think that's the barrier to entry to doing a lot of this, is because it seems like that's unnecessary and it's going to feel awkward to sit, to take every single email if it's not the most important thing in your world and sit there and make it and say, wait a minute, is that reference? Is that trash? What are you going to do with that? And actually making these kinds of decisions about things before the heat on them forces you to. That's a big habit change. And getting yourself to make decisions about stuff is, again, something that people can train themselves to do. You can actually train yourself to do it pretty rapidly. So it is simple. These are very simple behaviors. And the kind of paradoxical idea here is that these are behaviors everybody's already doing. It's not like they have to learn some new skill. It's not like a foreign language or a new technology people have to learn. They're already writing things down. They're already making action decisions. They're already using lists for calendars and things like that. So these are not foreign, behaviors.
Well, I think there's a certain power in identification. What you're saying is it's overwhelming until we name it, until we define it and ask it a few questions. That ties back into the 2-minute rule about getting things done. And if you're going to open this email, be prepared to answer those questions. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. You're going to end up looking at it again, and it's running these threads down to a single thread. You look at it, you deal with it, it's done, and it saves you all those repetition times. So that's where the time savings comes from. Could you tell me, or at least share with the audience, what is the relationship between positive outcomes, priorities, and next actions?
Well, a positive outcome, any kind of an outcome that you want to achieve that's not achieved yet, that has value to you is what you're after. And, creating a project list where you start to identify things that are bothering you as a project. I need to research that. I need to clarify that. I need to get closure on that. And the positive outcome, if you have your kid has a problem with one of their teachers in school, it's nagging at you in your head. A positive outcome may not be to get the perfect teacher or have that teacher change their behavior. The positive outcome may simply be, look, I need to get clarity or closure on whether I can improve this situation or not. And so, I don't want this to sound like motherhood and apple pie, na-na, nu-nu stuff. A positive outcomes go, look, I need to clarify this, or I need to handle this situation with this staff person that I've got, or I need to clarify the problem with the bank that showed up in terms of my credit line, and any of those kinds of things. The outcome is going to be what do I want to check off as done about this? What does done mean? The getting things done really requires two key elements. What does done mean? This is done when what's true. That's as simple as that sounds. That's a tricky thing to answer for a lot of stuff. What does done mean about this problem with your kid in the school? What does done mean about your vacation? What does done mean about the budget? What does done mean about hiring, or changing your organizational culture? You'll know that's done when what's true. So that's a very challenging and very wonderful thing to start to build as a habit, to start to think about what is the thing that's got my attention and what would resolution look, sound, or feel like. So just training yourself to think at that level, down at very operational levels or at very big, long horizon levels, any and all of that's really fine. And then what's the next action on any of those is the execution piece. Okay, now I've defined what done means. Get clarity about this situation with Billy and his math teacher. Cool. What's the next action? If you had nothing else to do but that, where would you go and what would you do? Is that a phone call? Is that a surf the web? Is that to go to the hardware store and buy something? What is it? If you had nothing to do but that, where would you go and what would you do? In other words, I know what done means, but what does doing look like and where does that happen? So now we've got outcome and execution. We have, a positive result, and we have how do we move the needle on it. So those are two critical elements. And if you say priority, you say, well, if you only had that to do in your life, that's one thing. But then you have to assess that against the 30 to 100 projects most people have. If you take my broad definition of more than one step outcome that you're committed to finish within a few weeks or months, get tires on your car, your next vacation, hire the assistant, look into a new cell phone process, any of those are all projects. And if you started to keep track of all of those, step back, and then you need to move the horizon up and say, okay, where are you going in your life, lifestyle, career, longer goals, life purpose? All those bigger levels of commitments are higher horizons that would identify commitments we've got at different scale. And you take a look at those and then go back to your project list and say, okay, do any of these need to move to someday maybe? They're a good idea, but they're not mission critical, or they're not something I really want to do. See, most people can't get it down to 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, high, medium, and low. If you want to get it done, God, you want to get it done. I mean, I have two priorities, talking to you and everything else. As soon as I stop talking to you, Richard, I'll decide. But I've got my whole inventory of possibilities. That doesn't mean that I should give up, wait a minute, strategy for my company, strategy for my professional life, strategy for my personal life. I'm still thinking about those too, and I need to go through those kinds of exercises so that's not unconscious to me and I'm aware of them. But then I just need to trust my intuitive choices on the day-to-day, moment-to-moment, project by project. Is that worth it? Should I be doing that? So I'm constantly thinking and reassessing. But it's a lot easier to constantly think and reassess from those more strategic ways of thinking when you have all of those maps out in front of you, as opposed to trying to let all that happen internally. That's just impossible. But getting them all out, that doesn't get rid of the challenge. It doesn't get rid of the risk you take. It doesn't make life easy. It puts your hand on the helm. It makes it a positive adventure.
Well, it's not the end of the journey, but it allows you to release from the dock and set off and start on your way, because you can't do much until you start to externalize it, and then you need to be able to organize it and prioritize it and review it and communicate it and actually get it out there in actuality to manage it. I want to take a couple minutes and dig a little bit deeper now that we've laid out the basic concepts and definitions, talking about juxtaposing the ideas of control and perspective. And specifically, what are the 5 keys to gaining control in an individual's life?
Well, they're the 5 steps. You need to capture what has your attention, what's not on cruise control. So you need to identify that. Number 2, you need to decide specifically what those things mean. What's actionable, what's not, what are the outcomes, what are the action steps I need to take. You need to then organize the results of that in appropriate places, so that step 4, you need to step back and have the capability to review and reflect on the whole gestalt and the whole inventory, so that step 5, when you then engage, you engage meaningfully, from your intuition or from your consciousness or your intelligence. Now that's how you get control of a company or your kitchen or a country. If you walk into your kitchen, I'm sure everybody listening to this has had walked into their kitchen and their kitchen was out of control. So what's the first thing you do? You start gathering everything that's probably not where it belongs, right? It's the food on the table, it's the things, it's the dirty cups, whatever. And what do? You gather them all together. You put them on where they go. And then what are you doing? Okay, what is this? Now you're making decisions about what does this mean? Is this food that needs to go in the fridge? Is this still savable? Or is this, this is awful, that needs to go here? And then you're deciding what it means. That's a dirty cup? No, that's a clean cup. And then what do? Well, you park clean cups where clean cups go. You put dirty cups where dirty cups go. You go stuff that's food that's savable, you put that in the fridge. Food that needs to be thrown away gets thrown away. Now, I know this sounds dumb and silly, but this is the 5 stages you go through. I capture, I clarify, I then organize based upon what these things mean. I then put them where those things go. And then I step back and look at the whole gestalt and say, okay, now time to pull out the butter and heat the skillet. So then you engage meaningfully once you've actually done that. That's how you get a meeting under control. That's how you get a conversation under control. That's how you get anything under control. There's these 5 very different stages, but they're different stages. And each one of these stages has its own best and worst practices and its own tools. That's what most people never got. They thought, okay, I need to get organized and set my priorities. Yeah, well, first of all, priorities is something you're only going to set once you've done these 5 stages so that you can actually have some stability with which to view your whole world and some stability and execution capability so that you trust the decision you're going to make. So that's why if you had to choose, do I want to get control or focus first? I say, well, get control first. You get either one. If you get highly focused on something, you will then go get in control in order to make that thing happen. So understood, there's a symbiotic relationship between control and focus. But if you had to choose, it's better to make your focused choices from a place of stability.
Well,
if your ship is sinking, you don't care where it's pointed. You just need to plug the hole, right?
Well, it's very much like setting up a camera. You don't want to adjust the perspective and focus on the camera until you get a stable tripod or some sort of stabilizer under it so you can get a nice steady shot. So juxtaposing this idea of control that you laid out, and I want to talk about focus and perspective. What are the 6 horizons that you've observed that pretty much apply to every individual I've ever met? And why don't we know about these 6 horizons already? Why did we have to wait for you to write this book?
I just discovered that there are 6 very definable horizons of our commitments. Very different content of these different horizons. I'll start at the top. Top horizon is, okay, what's your commitment as a human being or what's your commitment as a company? In other words, what's your purpose? What's the raison d'etre? Why do you exist? What are you here as a human being to do? What are you here as a company to do? So purpose would be at that top level. I'll call that horizon 5. And at the same level would be your values. What's really, really, really important to you, Richard? You don't care where you work as long as X. You don't care who you work with as long as X. And those will hear, what are your core values? Because your core values and your core intentionality or purpose are going to be your prime drivers. So there's a commitment at that level. I need to be a good person. I need to serve other people. And we're here to provide great education and information for people to improve their life conditions. Okay, fabulous. Now you got that. Now, how much is that going to help you decide which email to write first tonight? A little bit. But you're going to probably need to step down operationally to get some other horizons. So the next horizon down would be horizon 4, which we call vision. This is the long-term picture. Okay, if you were fulfilling your purpose successfully, what would that look, sound, or feel like? 5 years from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now, whatever. 100 years from now, whatever kind of way long big future out there would give you permission to say, oh, if I could make it up, wild success would look, sound, or feel like this. I'll be doing this with this level of impact, with this level of profitability, with this level of fun, with whatever. And then you sort of essentially create your own movie about that. So that's the next level of commitment. Okay, I'm committed, and this would be lifestyle or career, or for the company, the long-term goal or vision of kind of what business, how does it see itself in the world out there? And that could be much more specific and much more granular. You can get as granular as a 2-hour movie about the detail of what that could look like. But how much will that then help you decide which email to write first? Well, a little bit more. But then you're going to probably need to back it down and say, yeah, in order to make that grand, wonderful, wild success vision come about, what are the things I need to accomplish over the next 3 months to 24 months? What are the goals, essentially, or objectives? And don't get tied up in the words, but it's what's the shorter term things that we need to accomplish? Here's the 6 things we need to do in the company this year. Here's the 3 things my spouse and I would really like to have true by the end of this year in terms of our lifestyle. So getting clarity about that, that'd be what I call horizon 3. You still don't have anything to do yet. All you're doing here is defining and refining the images and pictures you've got in your mind that you'd like to have true. But then you need to back it down to what I call horizon 2. What are all the things you need to maintain so you have balance and stability of the enterprise to be able to get those goals and that vision? Oh yeah, we need to manage finances. Oh yeah, how about my health? How about my relationships? Oh yeah, how about my personal expression? How about my health and vitality? How about staff development? How about quality control? Now you get down to what we refer to as areas of accountability or interest or focus, and these are not things to finish. You don't finish growing sales. You just need to say, is that being maintained at some appropriate level? You don't finish health to say, is that at some appropriate level? So down at horizon 2, that's where you'd have your job description. That's where you'd have maybe a checklist about your life. How am I doing how's my health? How's my personal expression? How's my family? How's my relationships, et cetera? So that's another level of commitment, just to maintain, essentially, what are all those things I need to maintain? A lot of your day is spent, as soon as you eat lunch, you just said, that's a horizon 2 thing. I'm taking care of my body. As soon as you take a nap, that's a horizon 2. I'm watching my energy levels and my flow. You still don't have anything to do yet. Now, how much have you clarified your purpose, your vision, the goals you want to achieve, and all the things you need to maintain? How much would that help you decide which email to write first? A bit more. But then you're going to say, okay, now what are all the things you need to finish about all that? Oh yeah, I need to get a trainer for my health and energy. Oh yeah, I need to hire an assistant. Oh yeah, I need to increase my credit line at the bank. Oh yeah, now you got projects. Projects would be horizon 1. Those are all the things you need to finish. And as I mentioned, that's the 30 to 100 things, if you count personal and professional, that you need to accomplish. Or some part of you says, I need to finish all these things to maintain what I need to maintain and to move the needle toward the goals and vision that I have. And then you still don't have anything to do yet, by the way, because you don't get to doing until you get down to the ground level. And ground level, as opposed to any of these horizons, is, okay, phone calls, emails, buy at the hardware store, talk to my life partner about whatever. Now we come down to the next actions. What are all the action, the physical, visible activity that needs to go on about any of these open loops or any of these things and commitments in order to, make all those other horizons viable and aligned? And that's where most people have between 150 and 220 next actions at any point in time. The 13 phone calls you need to make, the 6 things you need from the hardware store, the 3 things you need to go over with your life partner, the 16 things you need to draft at your computer. Got a bunch of those. Now you actually have real stuff to do. So when you come back to how did I discover this? I actually came up with those horizons because I had a very senior guy in a big Wall Street firm I was doing some consulting and coaching in, that his biggest presenting issue was his calendar. He was just blocked for months. He had no room whatsoever. His assistant was turning to toast because she was trying to fend off everybody that politically wanted to get on this guy's calendar. And he closed the door. He said, David, what do I do about this? And I'm scratching my head going, what do I tell this guy? And he had a whiteboard in his office. And I went up and I actually laid out these different horizons. And as soon as I laid them out, I said, well, there's this horizon. I said, at what horizon do you want to have this conversation about your meetings? And he went, I got it. Got it. He looked at it and said, this is not about meetings. It's about I got teenage kids that are growing up out from under me, and I'm going to miss that game if I sit around trying to make partner till 11 o'clock at night. Got it. So it wasn't about, so I discovered that it was very helpful, though we all implicitly have these kind of commitments, some more than others and some more conscious than others. I don't tell people they should set goals at horizon 3. I just say if you got them, then you need to identify them. Because they're pulling or they're pushing on you anyway. So you need to make those conscious so that you don't break agreements with yourself. You don't have to have a vision, unless of course you do. So that's all up to you, how much and how conscious you need to be at these different horizons. But I guarantee you, the just your actions and projects, getting those horizons really clear, will suddenly make it a lot clearer for you to be able to think of these longer horizons and bigger things to do that. And also, we found over the years, this is very helpful lexicon for people and a framework for people to have a discussion. You and I want to talk about the future of the business and say, well, is this the big vision future, or is this, by tomorrow afternoon, what do we need to have true? And if you're doing blue sky stuff, here's our grand vision, and I'm trying to get accountabilities for real projects that we've got to have to make sure that we meet the goals that we need to have to be able to make your vision happen. We'll probably want to shoot each other. Just because we're passing in the night in terms of the horizon we're talking about. So it's very, very handy to realize, look, we've got these different levels of commitments that we have. Ideally, they want to be aligned. And just a very useful model, essentially, to think about. And they're all commitments. They're all, some level of agreement with myself that if the world is not matching whatever I'm holding as an inventory there, then I've got some sort of creative cognitive dissonance with myself. That's just nice to identify those maps.
Well, I think it's also providing a common ground for people to get on the same page by identifying what horizon they want to engage at on this particular topic. It's providing useful rules of engagement or best practices for what people, are going through every day. And again, it's the power of identification, in my opinion, that makes making things explicit using the words and nomenclature that helps release your mind from that confusion and fear and unknown and that's where serenity starts, because once you have a method and you've started to name it, it's in the process and you just have to rely on your habits. So I want to build upon this. I mean, I know it can be overwhelming for some people because you've had a lifetime of not using a method, and then you take inventory and you're like, wow, I have a lot of projects to do. But it's easy to break down what's more important, getting food or fixing this thing over here that's been broken for 2 years. We're going to get food before we fix this thing. So it's also easy to become overwhelmed. And once you're unoverwhelmed by your own situation, you want to start working with other people. You might have to work with some people on projects already just to get through your list. So let's talk about the recipe for having a successful meeting where things actually get done as a result.
Well, these two words, outcome and action, are great to build into meetings. What are we trying to accomplish by what time today? And do we have the right people in the room to do that? I mean, I can't believe how many meetings don't start out with going, okay, what would be success by 2 o'clock? By 2 o'clock, what we would like to have true? Because if you don't actually answer that question, you don't know how to frame your conversation. You don't even know if you should be in the room until that's clear. So clarifying what are we trying to accomplish, by what time, and a lot of people forget to ask that. You might want to accomplish something, but you've given an inappropriate time to do that. And so, you need to make sure that's clear. By what time, what do we like to have true? And you don't end conversations without going, so what did we just decide? What's the next step? Who's got that? So deciding next actions, or deciding at least accountabilities for decisions that were made or results that then you agreed on in the meeting. Those two things, man, I've seen that change the whole culture when that starts to be built into the lexicon. Just what are we trying to do? Okay, and once we decided, that something needs to happen or change, who's doing it? Who's accountable for that? And those two things themselves are extremely powerful. And understanding what the purpose for the meeting to begin with and why am I being invited? I mean, the meeting-itis is just eating the corporate world alive out there. And, there are so many that are just unconscious. They just, Monday meeting. Well, why are you having a Monday meeting? Well, because we had Monday meetings every week for 7 years ago. And yeah, but you haven't needed a Monday meeting. You haven't needed weekly meetings for the last 3 years. So it's very easy for these habits to get installed and just the cows to run down the cow paths, and not change them. So making these conscious. I mean, because that's the real critical element. Because meetings are fabulous. They're great ways to get a lot of really good stuff done, but only if they're managed appropriately and framed appropriately.
Well, and again, I think you're picking away at the vein of gold here, because the power is being unambiguous and using specific names to identify stuff instead of it being stuff. It's just like a weed outside. It's an unnamed plant that you have yet to identify, and once you do, you might find that particular plant to be fascinating. So you have this juxtaposition, this divide and conquer, where we have to fill in these blanks. You've presented a useful method to start down the road to do it for yourself, to work with other people in a group. And I just want to bridge this one last gap. Once it gets more complex for advanced users, I found that, I happily found that a product that I was using called the Personal Brain was also something that you at one time had used. And then I created my own getting things done model and started to integrate that. And that was one of the first things I did. So I found the brain to be particularly useful in mapping out history and the connectivity of it. But I was surprised to see someone like you using the brain. But then after I thought about it, I was like, this makes perfect sense. Can you tell me a little bit how you got to use the Personal Brain?
Well, I met Harlan. He was a big GTD fan who built it. And Jerry Mikowski was a major consultant who had his first brain up on the web many, many years ago with all of his, you could step inside of Jerry's brain just going on the web. And they kind of turned me onto it. And it's still a great reference material for me. I don't use it for my action list or for that kind of stuff, though I have some very sophisticated friends, and maybe you do too, Richard, who use it extremely well, especially when they're presenting to their staff. They can show all the relationships between, here's this project, here are the people involved in it, here's what I'm doing, here's my resources that I'm using, and they can actually give people a map of their mind and let them walk into it, especially as being the boss. Everybody can get a chance to see the world through the boss's eyes. So it's a fabulous tool to be able to do that. I use it as reference, as a way to create connections. Like, I've got it, if you go to my brain, I'm going to Atlanta shortly, and I just click Atlanta, and I've got a connection to every person and every organization that I might have an interest in that's in the Atlanta area. And I can see that, and then I can click on that person, and I'll see all the people that they know that I know, and anything that I've inserted in there. So it's a fabulous tool for being able to build those kind of ad hoc connections and connectivity. I like that. Personally, I like to be able to kind of get into a context and see, ooh, that's a cool thing, and that'd be a great opportunity. That's something I hadn't thought about before. So I use it as a support tool, really, not as a reminder tool so much. It's really a reference that essentially takes tagging to a much more elegant level.
What's the best activity or calendar tool or scheduling tool that you've found?
Well, right now we use Lotus Notes. We have for years in our company. We love that as an enterprise application. So, without having to reinvent the calendar or reinvent task list, I use those inside of Lotus Notes, and then I use eProductivity, which a friend of mine, Eric Mack, and his company ICA built an add-in module that fits on top of Lotus Notes that actually frames the being able to work email and work my action list in a really elegant way based upon the GTD, or getting things done methodology. So you need to be in a fairly specific environment that would be Lotus Notes to be able to use that tool. And then all that's now mapping to my iOS tools. So I have a Mac and I have iPad and an iPhone, and those are how I do it. But the strange paradox about this, you can probably relate to this too, Richard, is that the more you really understand this methodology, the less the tool matters. And the more you really understand about this methodology, the more the tool matters. So it's really the paradox of both. It's kind of like, it doesn't matter. I can just grab paper and pen. Hey, come on, I just fine with me. I don't need any more than that. That absolutely works for me, because all it is a way to keep it out of my head, and I can create lists in that way. So low tech actually works fine. And the more you really understand the methodology, the more I'm always tweaking and honing. A lot of my professional world is about, okay, what are the coolest ways with the least amount of psychic and physical effort I can maintain something and produce a result. So I'm constantly researching, okay, is there a simpler, better, faster way to do something like that?
Now, is that because you're lazy, or because you're endowed with a special kind of genius that other people don't have?
Well, I would love to say it's the latter, but I'm afraid it's the former. I really am lazy, and I've always loved models. I always loved the idea that how do I, without having to go change myself or get passionate about something or go discipline myself, how could I just do something this way and produce a better result? I mean, I wake up in the morning and go, how much easier can I do anything I'm doing today? I thought everybody thought that way. So if you want to call that genius, I go, fine. That's just the kind of the way I'm wired. I mean, I think efficiency is highly underrated out there. If you know where you're going, efficiency and style are your improvement opportunities, right? So I'm always thinking, what's the quickest, easiest way to get out of the room when I'm about to get out of the room? But I might not take that route. I might want to style and walk over here and look at something on the way. But I'm always thinking, okay, if I wanted to do it with the least amount of effort and energy, how would that occur? So I guess that's been my fascination and my, more my hobby that then became my profession over time, was doing that. But I don't know that I would call that genius. I would just call maybe my unique signature that then allowed me to create something nobody else had created.
Well, and I think the repetition over time leads you to discover nuances of it, but the universality of what you've discovered remains the same. And I think it remains the same through people, to people through time, and that certain people have had access to these types of tools before you gave a specific name to it and offered it so generously to the public. I think it's been out there in history that people knew how to get things done. That's what history proves to be. This is the story of people who got things done. My goal is to try to give every individual the opportunity and the tools to participate in history, because we're all participating in this story that's going on, and to add our voice, we need to learn how to use the active literacies and be able to communicate. But before we can do any of the learning that we need to do, we have to learn this one aspect and schedule some time for it, because without learning how to get things done, other people can't learn, all these other tools and tactics and useful strategies for dealing with everyday life. So I really think this is an essential and quintessential aspect that it's gone unnoticed by most individuals. And I hope to live in a future where if this is common knowledge, everyone knows this method, and you for bringing it to us. What is on the horizon for your organization, and where can people learn more about it?
They can learn more about it at our website, davidco.com, davidco.com. Lots of stuff there. Do a quick surf. You'll see a lot of different kind of things. We've got products, got free articles in our store. We've got lots of things you can do. You can get there's a free newsletter you can get. My Productive Living newsletter comes out every 3 or 4 weeks. And so you can stay in touch with the energy and with my voice. That pretty easy ways to do that. On the horizon, very cool stuff. We've partnered with a very cool software company in Bellevue, Washington, Intentional Software. It's a long-term research project about the next generation of productivity application in terms of the digital world. So no promises about that. But there are a lot of list managing tools, over 300 at the last count, that have been built around my model out there. And they're basically just list managers with various bells and whistles. But we think there's a whole new generation potentially of software that could very much support what I mentioned before, called, wow, I'm able to give myself a context that really lowers the barrier to entry for me to be doing very creative, innovative thinking and clear my head and get a lot of stuff done. So that's exciting. It's been a long time coming to find the right partner that had the intelligence and the bandwidth and the deep bench of talent that they're putting into this project. So that's fun. We're looking at a next book that will be out. No promises about that either. My CEO, Mike Williams, and my head of coaching, Meg Edwards, they're both parents. My wife and I don't have kids, but they do. And we're going to be co-authoring a book for caring adults and parents about how to use daily teaching moments so that your kids think this way before they walk out into that big, bad, ugly world. Because kids, we've already seen, down to age 4, 5, 6, can be taught outcome and action thinking, can be taught in baskets. They get it. They go, oh, well, that makes sense. And, boy, I wish I'd have learned this stuff before I was in my 30s. It would have made a huge difference in my life. We found that we could. So that's, again, a long-term initiative. We would love to do that. Parents for years have banged on our door. Oh my God, my kids need this. Is there some way we can get that into the schools and get that into into that process? So that's cool. And there's probably going to be a revised version of GTD and getting things done, coming out. So my publisher and I are talking about that right now. Not that any of the principles or methodology would change; those have stayed intact. But a little more of the subtleties and the whys and wherefores and application of this material much more universally. Some interesting stuff might show up there. We've got GTD Connect, our online learning community. It's fabulous, huge library of wonderful stuff. Lots of engaging, lots of webinars, lots of things like that. You can see about that. You can check that out on the website. So there's lots of stuff going on. Oh, we're also spreading around the world. We've started franchising globally. So getting exclusive franchisees and building our training model so that that's exportable to these folks, and building basically a global community of practice of certified GTD trainers. It's a big project right now that's in the works. So we already have Scandinavia and Middle and Eastern Europe and the UK and Mexico, and looks like Panama, and China's on the horizon. So that's happening. That's a very, very, very big project to get that off the ground and get traction, but it's starting to move. We're excited about that.
Well, I think everyone's excited to see other people learn how to get things done, because we all have common needs. We're not taught basic needs like what you're describing, but we also don't teach our children how to validate the contents of their mind, how to discern fact from fiction, how to tell when someone's lying to you. And I think that's kind of a crime that we don't do that before we send our children out into the world and expose them to public schooling and strangers and all these other things that go on. So I think that there's some fundamental tools, of which getting things done is one, learning how to learn anything for yourself, learning how to resolve disputes without violence is another tool set. There's about 10 of these that we've identified. But before anyone can take the time to learn any of the other 9, we first have to install this component called getting things done, because that is what allows us to stay in integrity. And without integrity, I mean, that's our currency as individuals. We don't use Federal Reserve dollars as our currency socially, because everything's based on trust, and trust is a reflection of integrity. Integrity comes back to, can you effectively manage your schedule and control yourself enough to have that perspective and be in the right place, doing the right thing at the right time, and being totally present during that process. So in an effort to bring this interview to a crescendo and wrap it up, I would first like to invite you back for part 2 sometime a couple months from now, after the audience has had some time to digest this and formulate some questions and feedback. I'd like to invite you back on to dig a little bit deeper and maybe make it more relevant, or to show you the similarities between these different systems, because another thing we've identified is it's basically observation, input, processing, and output. And once you get that system, it applies everywhere. And once you teach someone GTD as children, as you were mentioning, they get those basic skills. Then everything else is a breeze to learn the rest of the things that they need to learn for the rest of their life, because now you're cranking widgets using a repeatable process that brings consistent results of a high degree of certainty. And I think that helps restore people's self-reliance, self-confidence, and self-esteem. And I think that's one of the reasons I was very excited to be able to do this interview, introduce your work to a new audience who may or may not have been aware of it, but especially to present it in such a way that people will see, even if you just try a little bit of this, you're going to see results. But you get the most results when you really jump in with both feet and get some folders, and you make your labels, and you get organized. And then that gives you the freedom and room for productivity so you can be creative. So David, I just wanted to thank you for taking time once again for sharing this wisdom with our audience.
My pleasure, Richard. Happy to, and happy to come back.
And with all that being said, if you'd like to learn more about David's encapsulation of wisdom vis-a-vis his books, lectures, and other avenues of communication, you can visit davidco.com. And as always, you can drop in on our latest productions at tragedyandhope.com. Fly with us on Twitter and stay up to date with relevant and substantial points of interest on the internet. And continue this journey of self-education through our podcast curriculum at peacerevolution.org. Tragedy and Hope. In order to be more productive, focus on substantial positive outcomes, organize by priority, and move forward with the next actions of the most important steps. That's how we get things done, and this studio and this show is proof of what I'm talking about. Until next time, I'm Richard Grove, and I thank you for scheduling some time in your busy schedule to tune in and not drop out.